Are you tired of overcomplicated meal plans? Same. Well, this meal plan includes 6 dinners, uses everyday ingredients, costs under $60, and it's packed with flavor. So stick around and let's take a look. Here is our menu for this week, and I hope you'll notice that we're going to use some meats that are relatively low cost, but I think kind of get overlooked a little bit. So this helps us have a nice variety, but still keep us really low on our budget. Here is our grocery list for the week. Now, our totals this week came from the Walmart Supercenter in Perrysburg, Ohio. Our total was $59.67, and this is going to be all the items that you need for these recipes. Now, keep in mind, we do assume that you have your preferred cooking oil and whatever your favorite seasonings are. Now, there is a small part in here where you're going to need like a little bit of butter or a little bit of butter, a little bit of flour, and some type of acidic component. And I'll explain that when we get to there. But I want you to look at this list and check your fridge, your pantry, your freezer, because you may have some of these items. Now, also keep in mind that, say for instance, we're going to use ground pork. If you already have ground turkey or ground beef, you can easily substitute that. We're going to do bone-in chicken thighs this week because they're on sale at Walmart. But if you already have, boneless thighs or even chicken breasts, that's an easy swap here. So look at what you already have and see if it will work in place of some of these items, because that's how we're going to save the most amount of money. Now, I have 2 links down below. One goes to my Walmart grocery list. You can see all of these items on Walmart. The second is to my website where you can go see all of the slides as well as download your free PDF. It includes the shopping list as well as all of the recipes. So let's look at the recipes. Now, our first recipe is going to be a lemon herb roasted chicken thigh. Now, that sounds kind of complicated or fancy, but it's so simple. Now, in the past, you may have heard me say I'm not always a big fan of lemon pepper seasoning. If I want that lemony flavor, I'm just going to buy a lemon because to me it tastes so much better. And this is so simple because we're going to use one big sheet pan, and then we're also going to add some potatoes and some carrots. So this is a classic sheet pan meal where everything goes on the same pan and just cooks in the oven. Now, I'm including Italian seasoning just because it's a very basic seasoning and it goes really well with lemon. But if you have a whole bunch of other seasonings in your cabinet, you can easily switch this up and pick whatever herb blend you'd like. Our second dinner this week is going to be a pork and cabbage stir fry. Now, in my family, we really love ground pork. It's a whole lot cheaper than ground beef. 2, it is actually way less fat than what people think. Most people assume that ground pork is the same as sausage, but sausage has a really high fat content, whereas ground pork is going to be similar to like a ground turkey or a ground beef, where the actual percentage of fat is actually pretty low. Now, this is also usually called like egg roll in a bowl, stuff like that. You can call it whatever you want. Now, we're going to use 2 items to kind of make this sauce. We're going to use just some regular soy sauce, and then I like to use sesame oil. I put it on here as optional because some people don't care for that, and that's totally fine. Now, we are going to use some garlic cloves minced up as some extra flavor. And as always, you can always adjust the seasonings with your favorite seasonings if you like. I have a couple packets. I think it's called stir fry seasoning. And I don't use a whole packet because it's a little too strong, but I do sometimes use that if I feel like it needs some extra flavor. Now, here in the South, we have what's called false fall. It's when it's super hot all summer long, and then all of a sudden it cools off like really good. Like the last couple of days here, it's been like in the 60s all day, which is amazing. But it's totally got me craving like that cozy stew crock pot meal, and this is where this comes in. Now, this is a great one because you can really just add whatever you want in here. So we're going to use 2 cans of white beans. Now, I picked canna lily beans, which are white kidney beans, but you could do like Great Northern beans. You can do any white bean you like, or even go wild. You could use pinto beans, really any beans that you like. Now, we're going to throw in some carrots, some celery, and some onion, and of course, some garlic cloves. But this is a great chance for you to go check your fridge and your freezer because you may have just some random little pieces of vegetables that you want to add in here to use them up. Now, once again, we're going to use Italian seasoning here, but that is because Italian seasoning can be used in so many different ways, and it's just a great base seasoning. But once again, if you don't particularly care for that flavor, you can use whatever seasoning you like. Now, I do want to say that I don't know if Walmart's listening to me, but for weeks, their French bread has been like $1.47, and all of a sudden now it's back to $1. And I love this stuff. I buy it all the time, and it freezes really well. Now, our fourth meal this week is going to be a kielbasa and broccoli Alfredo. Now, a lot of times when you do Alfredo, you see it with chicken, and that's fine. But these kielbasa sausages, and really you could use any sausage you like. These are just typically smoked sausage, meaning that it's already cooked. You're really just heating it up. This is one of those where it's just a super, super quick, get it in a pot on the stove, and then boom, you have dinner usually within about 20 minutes. Now, the other part of this, I wanted to show you that you can use a whole lot different meats. You don't have to use chicken to make Alfredo. Even though typically when you go to a restaurant, you see chicken Alfredo, it's not the end all be all of Alfredo. Now, I recently tried this ragu Alfredo sauce that has bacon in it, and honestly, it is really, really good. So I wanted to show you all this, but you can use whatever Alfredo you like. Now, of course, we're going to have a little bit of bread left over, so we could easily do a couple slices to serve with this, and you could make garlic bread or you could just do butter bread, whatever you like. Okay, the fifth meal, now stay with me on this one. Okay, first off, we're going to show some nice little hacks here, and we're going to show you a fun way to use up leftover celery. Because I don't know about you, but I'll buy like this big old thing of celery, and I'll need about half of it, and then I got the other half of it, and it just sits there. Now, you can freeze celery for later, and I do that a lot. But in this case, we were only going to be using about half of our head of celery. So I wanted to show you a really cool side dish that's called a celery and apple salad. But before I get to that, let's go back to the main part of this meal is a chicken parm meatball bake. Now, this recipe typically calls for breadcrumbs. Now, because we already have that big loaf of French bread, what I want you to do, and this is the perfect way to use up the little heels, like the end pieces of the bread, because you don't always use those when you're making like garlic bread or butter bread. So I want you to take the end pieces and I want you to tear it up really, really small. Now, one thing you can do here is you can take those little bread chunks and put it in a food processor and then just let it run for just, some pulses. And then boom, now we've got fresh breadcrumbs. So instead of buying breadcrumbs, we're using items we already have. Now we're going to make our meatballs using the ground chicken, those, fresh breadcrumbs. Now, typically you would use egg as the binder. Well, in this whole meal plan, we only need one egg, and you can't really go to the store and buy one egg. So now if you already had an egg, you could go ahead and use that. But if you didn't want to have to buy an egg, we are going to use a tablespoon of honey Dijon mustard. And I know that sounds weird, but A, it's a great binder, and two, you don't even taste the honey or the Dijon in there. But it does, if you were to really like that flavor, you could add a little bit more, and it'll just add a little bit more dimension to your meatballs. But honestly, once it cooks in the sauce, you can't taste it anyway. So, and then once again, we're going to use some Italian seasoning. You can use whatever seasoning you like. We're going to make our meatballs. We're going to put them in a pan. We're going to cover them with the marinara sauce, and then we're going to bake them. Now, while that's baking, because it's going to take about 20-25 minutes, we're going to boil our pasta. We're using one package of egg noodles, so we're going to use half for this dinner and half for the other one. And then for our salad, this is so cool. If you've ever had like a Waldorf salad, this is very similar vibes. So we're going to take about 3 of our celery sticks. We're going to either slice it really thin, or sometimes I just go with a small dice. We mix it with our apple, and then we're going to use mayonnaise, and then we're going to need an acid. Now you can use lemon juice or you can use vinegar. And usually those are items that you may already have. Now, I will tell you that as a little sneaky thing, whenever I don't have vinegar, I just look at what types of like pickled items I have in my fridge. That could be just, your hamburger dill pickles, could be jalapenos. All of that brine is basically vinegar. So you could easily look around and see what you have. And honestly, vinegar, it has a strong smell, but once it's exposed to air, that smell leaves, but you still want the acid. So we're just going to make a quick little simple, like a dressing, if you will. So we use that mayonnaise, whatever our, vinegar or lemon juice. And then I would add usually some salt and pepper in here. Some people like to add a little bit of white sugar for extra sweetness, but it depends on how sweet you want. And then you're going to mix it with your celery and your apple, and you've got this nice little side salad that's very similar to like a Waldorf. Now, once those meatballs are done cooking, we're going to lift off the foil. We're going to top it with some cheese, bake it for a little bit more, and then we'll serve it over the egg noodles. Now, I don't know about you, but I am a huge fan of the ham and potato combo. Ham is kind of salty, and to me, potatoes need salt. So that's why they're kind of like best friends. So we're going to do one of my favorites, which is scalloped potatoes, but we're going to add the ham in there. So it's more like a ham and potato and cheese casserole. Now, this is going to start with a roux. So we're going to take that little bit of butter, the little bit of flour, we're going to mix it up in a pan, to where you start that roux. We add the milk, and then we're going to add half the cheese. So that's our sauce. And then we're going to lay down our potatoes with a little bit of ham, a little bit of sauce, and then repeat it. Now, I have down that we're going to use a cup of shredded cheese, but honestly, I don't really measure. So I just kind of go with my heart here. Now, I've just got plain cheddar. Honestly, this works for really any cheese, so I would just pick whichever cheese you like. And since we're going to have this in the oven already, and the oven's already on, I figured let's do some roasted green beans. Once again, whenever you're going to do a vegetable like this, you just drizzle it with your favorite oil and then whatever your favorite seasonings are. I tend to keep mine pretty plain, so I do like salt, pepper. I either do like ranch seasoning or I do like garlic powder or onion powder, and they always just come out really good. But keep in mind that you do have to trim your green beans, which is just those little pieces on the end. You can just use your fingers and just kind of twist them off, or use a knife and just kind of cut the edges off, just because those are the parts you don't want to eat. So this one is super easy and it's really adaptable. So if you have other vegetables you want to throw into the casserole, like I said, all's fair in love and potatoes, right? Now, if you hang out over on Facebook, you'll know that I always include some kind of fruit with my dinners. I do this because my kids love fruit. I also do it because it's what everybody needs is in terms of fiber, and most Americans don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. They may get the vegetables, but they very rarely get the fruit. So I always want to include some low-cost fruit options. My hope is that you already have some of the items on the grocery list, so your total will be less, so you have a little wiggle room to buy some fruit. Now, you could buy one fruit, you could buy two fruits, you could mix fruits, and if you don't want to cut up your own fruits, you could easily pick up some canned fruits or even frozen fruits. I only just recommend that you don't buy like the pre-cut fruit unless you really want fresh fruit, but you're not able to cut it yourself, because those do get really, really expensive. But like, for instance, you could buy a whole big pineapple for $1.75. Whereas if you bought just the amount of pineapple that you would cut, you're looking at $8 or $9 because you have to pay somebody else to cut that pineapple for you. So if possible, always cut your own fruit. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this week's meal plan and it's given you some fresh ideas for what you can do at home. Now, don't forget, for the full recipes and the shopping list, go over to my website and grab the free printable like PDF file. Now, that's down below, as well as the grocery list. Now, this is week 73. Yes, so there are 73 meal plans on our website. They're all free. You can download as many as you want. And then we also have the mini meal plans, which is 3 dinners instead of 6. So at this point, you have over 100 different options of what you can do for dinner. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next week.